Well, my name is Shane Hetzler, as I mentioned before. I'm a consulting forester with Trout Forestry, and since I walked through the door this morning, I've been told about, I don't know, a handful of times how great my colleagues did up at North Coast and Mid Coast, and you guys are stuck with me, so yeah, the bar has been set high. But I'm going to be talking to you all today about managing and planning in forested drinking watersheds. And so briefly, Trout Mountain Forestry, we manage about 30,000 acres across Western Oregon. We're based in two different offices. We have a Portland office and a Corvallis office. I'm down in Corvallis. Really have a pretty diverse set of clientele, and that's everybody from land trusts, municipalities, private forest landowners, do some work with the tribes, just folks that are really keyed in on our brand of forestry, our style of forestry that we practice. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. We are FSC certified. We have a group certificate. So our clients that want to participate in that program, we're able to provide that service. On the municipal side of things, long-term municipal clients, so more than 20 years, City of Forest Grove, City of Cannon Beach, City of Corvallis, and we'll talk about Corvallis and Cannon Beach a little bit later as kind of case studies for some of the work that we've done with them over the years. New clients to us, South Coast, Reedsport and Coquille. So it's great to be working down here, and there's definitely some familiar faces in this crowd, but also a lot of new faces. So we're excited to keep interacting with folks down this way. So forest management planning, broad strokes here. Management plans are going to provide a framework. They're not meant to be overly prescriptive, not really focus on the nuts and bolts of any operational stuff that we do. It's kind of the 20,000, 30,000 foot view. But what they do that's really important is we're going to identify the baseline conditions out there. So soils, water, what's growing in the understory, what's growing in the overstory, those types of things, get that biophysical picture. We're going to use that information, working with our clients to talk with them about the values, some of their goals and objectives that they have for the land. And our job as professional foresters is kind of see where they come together in that classic, middle of the Venn diagram or whatever. And then we make strategic recommendations based on what the land is telling us and what our clients are telling us that are hopefully in line with the ecology of the site. That's something that we really try to stay grounded in. These plans, they capture the goals, policies, practices, and intent of the client, but they're also a really important communication tool, especially for municipalities. If you're public facing and stuff, these plans can be really helpful for communicating what's going on behind the gate up in the watershed. And last note here, the plans are meant to be adaptable. They've got about a 10-year lifespan on them. At least the ones that we write, and at the same time, they're not carved in stone. Why is that? Well, forests are dynamic. It could be an ice storm one year that we weren't planning for, and we need to adapt to it. So those plans, by extension, need to be flexible and adaptable. But if we've done our job, they've captured the intent, the overall broad strokes of what management is supposed to look like on those lands. So drilling down a little bit more on municipal watersheds, yeah, water quality is a primary beneficial use, but it's not the only thing that people value up on those landscapes. I think it's really important to note here too that municipal watersheds, they're part of a managed landscape, and they have a managed history, whether that was the indigenous use or whether that was past timber harvesting. Anything in between, there's been a lot of management typically on those landscapes. Some people have like an idea that they're sort of primordial areas, untouched by man, wilderness, and there are some of those qualities out there, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of management going on. There has been a lot of management going on. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially as you're communicating with the public and stuff. So what does management look like on these municipal lands that we manage? Well, there's silvicultural applications like thinnings or variable retention harvests or pre-commercial thinnings, tree plantings, those types of activities. There's invasive species management. Infrastructure is obviously a big thing. You guys know that. This crowd knows that very well. Whether it's maintaining or improving roads or decommissioning roads, replacing culverts, installing fish ladders, and that kind of transitions into the last point there, the wildlife habitat creation and promotion component. So, we've done meadow enhancements in the past. We've done snag creation, downwind debris placement, log placements, streams, those types of activities. They're all happening on these lands that we work on and lands that we don't work on. You can't talk about municipal forest land without talking about stakeholders. It's really important to note that each municipality defines them, and they also develop their engagement strategies, and we can help with that at Trout Mountain. But at the end of the day, that directive is kind of coming from the municipality. At the same time, we can't underestimate their importance for obvious reasons. If you talk to folks like we have that come up on our tours on the Corvallis Forest, for example, take our surveys and stuff, water quality ranks high, but it's not the only thing that people value up there. And that's a really important consideration as well.
So we're going to talk about the city of Cannon Beach. I started working with the city, I think it was in 2004. And at that time, they just had one tax lot, and it was about 50 or 60 acres around their springs where they get most of their water. They didn't own any of the surrounding landscape, and most of it was owned by industrial forest companies. I think it was Weyerhaeuser at the time. The water for the city comes from the springs, and then late in the summer, when the demand is high, there's some water sometimes gets taken directly out of the West Fork, Ecola Creek. Community leaders were opportunistically seeking to buy land or work out arrangements with their neighbors so that they could have better, reduce the risk long term, like Josh was talking about. And the amazing story is that within less than 10 years, they had increased their ownership to over 1,000 acres. The original ownership is here, and the springs are here. And in 2003, they acquired an additional 40 acres here from Weyerhaeuser that was very sensitive, it's right up against their springs. So they were most interested in protecting that. They were able to purchase that before it was harvested. In 2004, they added another Weyerhaeuser piece, and this one was acquired. I may not have all the financing right, but that one was acquired, I believe, with financing from OWEB, and there was a conservation easement on that property. It was maybe once you get started, it's hard to stop. Somehow they got the idea to acquire this 800-acre piece from the state. So that was the Ecola Forest, which was historically part of Oregon Department of Forestry's management. And that was very complicated because the state doesn't sell land. They would only do a land swap of equal value. So the city had to find and acquire a property of equal value that the city would want and do the swap. So very complicated. It's amazing that they were able to pull it off. That one was also with OWEB funding, and there's a conservation easement on that as well. And I believe also the city had to pass a bond to help pay for it. So the citizens helped pay for it. Because the two tracts were purchased with OWEB funding, it's really important to note, and Daniel pointed this out, they have conservation easements. Well, that conservation easement basically says this land is going to be managed for the conservation values, and that's the wildlife habitat and the fish habitat. The water, protecting the water supply. So that's really driving it. So it kind of limits, in their case, it kind of limits the active forest management that's really even possible. There is active forest management, but it has to be in a management plan that the city approves, and then OWEB actually has to sign off on it. So there was some interest in doing some active management, and the goal was really to take these younger second growth conifer stands that were really uniform, not a lot of habitat diversity, and not necessarily on a trajectory to replicate the older forest that was there previously. So we designed and ultimately implemented some treatments, including harvesting some trees. So I'll talk about that. There was a city staff, citizens advisory committee that were active through the whole process. And actually we did 3 plans. So that's the other lesson, is that planning is kind of an ongoing process. And as circumstances change, the plan will need to be updated. So one of the really cool things about the Ecola Creek Forest Reserve is the old growth cedar trees that are up by the springs. If anyone's ever walked up through there on the road, you come past these unbelievably huge, there's me, there's one of those old growth cedar trees. They're maybe 800 years old. Some of them are 15 feet across. And that's kind of an iconic symbol of what the forest maybe used to be like throughout that area. Interestingly, when we did our first inventory of the younger stands, there was really no measurable cedar. So there was no cedar that was planted or that survived the elk. And so one of the goals for the restoration was to actually work on getting more cedar established. But the goals for the reserve are first to protect and restore the native forest, protect municipal water quality, protect and enhance salmon habitat, and foster community involvement, which is maybe the trickiest part of the whole thing, right, Trevor? So you want people to be engaged, but not overly engaged, because everyone's got their own idea about how it should be managed, and you just can't please everyone. Unfortunately. The next slide is just a map kind of showing the different habitat types on the reserve, just to give you an idea of what it's like. Basically, there's a small area, maybe 20, 30 acres of older forest. It's got the cedar, it's got some older hemlock, and there we go. That's this red area. This light green area is basically riparian alder, so it's heavily dominated by hardwood. It's basically flat, and it's a lot of streams and tributaries into the North Fork and the West Fork of the Ecola Creek. And then the yellow are younger conifer plantations, and the green is a little bit older, like 50 to 70-year-old conifer, very even-aged, fairly uniform. There are some pockets in here of older spruce, the purple, probably 150-year-old trees kind of scattered through there. The second plan that we did, so the first plan was just for the original 220 acres, the 2 smaller acquisitions. And then after they acquired the Ecola tract, it necessitated a new plan. And basically in that planning process, the community reiterated, the goals hadn't changed, the overall management strategy was going to be the same. We did talk more specifically about some forest management projects, and there was a little bit of controversy, I would say, around the hunting policy. I think hunting was technically allowed previously on the ODF parcel, and the community was really a little bit divided. Ultimately, they ended up going with a permit system for hunting, and after a couple of years with no one applying for that permit, I think they just decided to not have hunting. Most of the citizens that were involved in that process really didn't want hunting. So that's just the way that worked out. And the next picture is just a photo of one of the probably 50 or so year old spruce stands that, real uniform, not a lot of understory development, habitat-wise, somewhat limited. And the project that we implemented in 2013 was kind of a restoration thinning. We thinned, we probably took out about 20 truckloads of logs, so pretty small project, but it paid for itself. It paid for some improvements to the road. And go ahead and get the next one. And then later on, there's a slide that shows kind of what it looked like afterwards, and people were generally happy with it. It basically opened up the canopy, get another H class. You talked about redundancy and having multiple canopy layers. That was part of the goal. And we also used it as an opportunity to get more cedar established. Lessons we learned in the thinning project was that we thought, oh, August, September, it's usually pretty dry. We'll be able to get in on this mostly dirt road system and do a little project and get out. Well, it rained a bunch in mid-August that year, and it just made things really difficult. So we realized that the city, if they wanted to do more projects like that, they would have to invest a lot more in the roads, and it just wasn't worth it. It just didn't seem like it was enough of a priority. So that was an important lesson. We also did another OWIP funded project, which was large woody placement in Ecola Creek. And that was a really cool project because we used wood all from the reserve, including some large spruce that were cut and kind of lifted up by the helicopter and placed in the creek. And then, like I said, over time we planted thousands of western red cedar trees in different locations, kind of strategically, just to try and keep the cedar part of that ecosystem. And the next photo is just a photo of the post-harvest. It's about 5 years after the thinning project was done. We did a third plan update, and that third plan update was just triggered by time because it had been 10 years since the 2013 plan. And so there was a need for a new plan. And this time it was a little bit easier because we didn't have new property to digest. But what had really changed, and I wanted to talk a little bit about wildfire and wildfire risk. And I saw Aaron lifted his head there, so I'm glad you're here, Aaron, to maybe chime in on wildfire risk and how it's changed over time in the North Coast. When we first started our planning in 2006, we really almost dismissed the risk of wildfire in the Cannon Beach forest. It just didn't seem like very likely to happen, like under only the most extreme conditions. And so it was really low on the priority list. And as a result, emergency access in the road system maybe didn't get the attention it deserved. After the 2020 Labor Day fires, and we had the Echo Mountain Complex fire down in Lincoln City, kind of a wake-up call, like it was around the state, that actually these forest types, these alder riparian areas that we thought would never burn, actually can burn under those extreme conditions. And so we identified the need to improve the road system in the Ecola Creek Forest Reserve, which still was a little bit controversial. There were still members in the community that felt like maybe it was too much. It was kind of a wilderness area, and we should just kind of leave it alone. So that was a little bit difficult in terms of public process. But then, as we were implementing some of these modest improvements to the roads, there was actually a wildfire started by a houseless person who had a camp on the edge of the reserve, and there was a wildfire. And when the fire department came with their apparatus to fight the fire, they did not feel comfortable driving down the main access road in the back of the reserve. They just weren't sure it was safe because there wasn't enough clearance. There weren't defined turnarounds and pullouts. So they ended up, I think they had to lay like 3,000 feet of hose to fight that fire. And that was, again, kind of a wake-up call that, boy, we just as a landowner, you need to make sure you can deal with emergencies like that. And so right away, the city got on that and we made some improvements, and I think it's a lot better now.
Okay, now we're going to talk about something that I actually know about because I manage the City of Corvallis Forest. We've been working with the City of Corvallis since about 2006. They own a little under 2,400 acres on the east flank of Mary's Peak. Their ownership is within the 10,000 acre Rock Creek watershed, and the Rock Creek drainage, of that 10,000 acres, about 6,400 of it is actually above the intake, so that's the municipal drainage. But the city only has 300 acres above the intake. So most of their forest is downstream from the intakes and outside of the actual municipal watershed. That doesn't matter. They're still managing it as if, they're in the watershed. They want to be good stewards. So that watershed supplies about 1/3 of the city of Corvallis' water annually. All of this property that the city owns was acquired through the early 20th century. In the early 20th century, I think 1910s, is when Congress designated that a municipal watershed. So part of that ownership structure, the configuration of the ownership on the landscape, was that the Forest Service acquired and maintained ownership of quite a bit of land up there. So there's been, over the course of this ownership that they've had for over 100 years, there's been an incredible evolution of management objectives and approach, generally speaking, in that property, both with the Forest Service and on the city of Corvallis ownership. In the mid-20th century, there was some major disturbance. There were the Columbus Day storm, there was significant beetle outbreaks, and so basically there were very aggressive salvage harvest operations occurring out there. Roads were being built to provide access and management, and then after that, the forest was being managed, the city forest was being managed by the Forest Service as a timber producing entity. So all of that ended in 1987 because of the spotted owl. People were concerned. The folks in Corvallis said, no more, we don't want to do that. This is our watershed. So, of course, everyone knows major changes happened with the Forest Service, but similarly, and management of those lands, but similarly, major changes happened with the management of the city of Corvallis Forest. And basically, they put a hiatus on harvesting in 1987, and nothing was done for 30 years. So, next slide, please. This map shows the location of the Corvallis Forest on the east flank of Mary's Peak there. It's about 15 miles from the city of Corvallis. Slide. And this shows some detail on the actual ownership relative to the basin and the ownership pattern in there. So in the center, you can see in red is the city ownership with Rock Creek bisecting that. And then the upper reaches of Rock Creek and the watershed boundaries in blue, and the hash mark is the actual catchment location. That's all essentially on the Forest Service, with the exception of these few little areas above the intakes. Other folks in the landscape are industrial owners, small non-industrial, and then just other private entities. So a couple of things that are really interesting and unique about Corvallis, or that kind of set the stage for management, is one, the history. There's about 1/3 of the ownership is legit old growth, uncut, old forest that's been there for a long time, has all those values and the structure and the components, and it's really high value for numerous reasons, primarily habitat, structure, carbon storage, resiliency, all those things. But there's also about 1/3 of the property that's plantations as a result of the early 20th century management. Some of the oldest, there's plantations that were established in the late 50s and early 60s, so very old plantations, really early examples of reforestation and timber management done by the Forest Service on city lands. So that's one thing. We have this history of management that impacts the conditions out there, the two ends of the spectrum. But then also we have this, it's Corvallis. I don't know if anyone's spent much time in Corvallis, but it's a very well-informed, educated community. Everyone's very engaged and pretty much a PhD. So, people are interested. They want to know what's going on and why. And they're going to show up and ask those questions, which is great. It really it adds a layer of accountability to management. Slide, please. So after this 30-year hiatus of nothing happening on the forest following this ending of harvesting in 1987, Trout Mountain Forestry got involved, and we worked with the city Public Works Department to help them develop the Corvallis Forest Stewardship Plan in 2006. So that was the first modern age plan that was put together on the property And in 2007 was the first commercial harvest on that forest in 30 years. It was a selection harvest, everyone was very engaged in what was going on, and I would say it was quite successful. We had objectives that were outlined in the plan, and we're following those objectives, so it started kind of this new era of modern management of this forest. The plan was updated in 2013, and then right now we're currently in the process of updating the current plan. We had hoped to get it done this year, but probably by 2025, we will get that plan wrapped up. This plan with the Corvallis Forest, again, it's a framework. It's not a prescriptive, harvest plan or anything like that. It really describes the property. It identifies those values out there, and then it establishes some very, very, distinct sideboards for management. What are we trying to do? It has a vision for the forest. It has guiding principles, policies, standards, and guidelines. So all of these things are tearing down to more and more detail in what we can and can't do and putting sideboards on that management. And this comes out of, slide please, this public process. The city's very serious about the public process. The planning process right now involves Public Works Department, Trout Mountain Forestry, and the public. There's a citizen task force. The citizen task force was convened specifically to advise Public Works on development of this forest management plan. They meet monthly. This public is invited to those meetings to ask questions, give testimony, observe. So we're in this process right now. And as part of it, these vision, guiding principles, policies, those have all been updated. So we're not just, saying, well, this is what we need to do from here forward, but we're saying, what do folks want today relative to what did they want in 2013 or 2006? So all of those things are updated. This is a photo of the advisory group there out on a site during a commercial fitting a few years ago. Slide. This public engagement, and like I said, every community is different. It's how you engage the public, who your stakeholders are is defined by that community. In Corvallis, they take it very seriously, and this is an ongoing process. We have a task force that I mentioned that's advising on the plan development, and that's going to sunset, but there's an advisory committee. And this is a citywide entity. There's an advisory committee for the Parks Department and for the MLK Day and for all these different parts, aspects of the community, and there's one for the Corvallis Forest. The advisory committee meets periodically, and they advise on actual management, not just the planning, but management. And through all of this process, it's very clear that public interests are not static. People's ideas evolve, the community changes, new issues arise like climate resiliency and fire. And so the plan updates reflect this. And basically each of the three, well, we've got two updates, but each of the three plans has kind of tried to capture what the community's changes have been. So, and finally, all of the planning from this overarching stewardship plan level, high level planning, down to the operational level, like these are the areas where we're going to do some commercial thinning, all of that involves public input. So those operational plans are presented to the committee. Folks can come and weigh in on it. We can do tours. Slide, please. So I wanted to share the vision statement for the Corvallis Forest with you all, and I'll read it really quickly. The Corvallis Forest within the Rock Creek Watershed is a model of sustainable forest management practices, esteemed by Corvallis residents as a diverse forested landscape that provides numerous benefits, including safe and reliable drinking water, resilience to climate change, diverse terrestrial and aquatic habitats for native species, and abundant carbon storage. So it's not just about the water. It's in there and it's important and it's a primary, but it's not just about the water. So there's a lot of other stuff going on that landscape and in that management. Next slide, please. So these are some of the values. I don't need to read them all, but there's a lot of different values in here that are identified on the forest. This is a picture, that's an image of the landscape of the Rock Creek Watershed in the Corvallis Forest. And to the trained eye, you can see different age classes of forest in there, but anyway, there are lots of values out there and a range of them. And so we have to, if we want to value all of these things, we have to talk about trade-offs in management. And that's maybe the hardest thing to do, because a lot of folks have one thing that they really, really care about, and other things they don't so much. But you have to consider them all. You have to understand there are going to be trade-offs in this management. And you also aren't going to get there without some level of management. It may or may not include cutting trees, but there's got to be some level of management if you want to have, habitat value and be a good neighbor and have resilient forests. So there's management involved in this forest, this landscape. So implementing the plan, I want to talk a little bit about that. And implementing, really the silviculture focuses on adding diversity, promoting resiliency, and protecting water resources. So like I said, there's a bunch of, about the property is split in about thirds between this plantation condition, these old growth forests, and then there's something in the middle that's kind of hard to define, but we call them the middle-aged forest. Clever. And these middle-aged forests are basically stands that showed up post-European settlement. So it's like there might have been agricultural fields out there. There might have been indigenous burning that stopped. There might have been early 20th century logging that naturally regenerated. So these are forests that are basically arranged for something like maybe 60 to 160 years old. And in those forests, they have some very old trees, maybe up to 250 or older. So those are interesting stands that really have opportunities for management in them, because they may not quite get to where we want them to go without some management because of how they originated. So basically, but what's driving implementation is these current conditions and the management plan. So that's what's driving what we do on the ground. Slide, please. This is an aerial photo from our little drone that shows a commercial thinning. We use a thing called variable density thinning, where you vary the density of your leaf trees out there to create different conditions on the landscape in the stand that you're treating. We create gaps. You can see a single tree with lots of space, so that's intentional to create more complex structure in that forest. So there's a lot of thinning that goes on in those plantation forests. Like I said, the middle-aged stands have some opportunity for management as well. Not all of them, but this is forestry. This is very nuanced. We have this very well-crafted plan, and there's a lot of thought that goes into this management. So we're not just out there, doing things haphazardly. So that third component, the old growth component of the forest, is essentially those are reserves. There's nothing to do there, given the objectives of the plan. Maybe if there was some catastrophic event or a weed outbreak or something, we might do some management, but for all intents and purposes, those are set aside. We also have riparian areas and areas in the catchment basin as reserves. Those may be managed because those may be comprised of plantation conditions that could benefit from this management. So again, there's just some nuance here. So over the past 10-year planning period, which was 2013 to 2023, we did 5 harvests out there over about 361 acres, and the bulk of it was basically thinning. Here's an image of some cable thinning occurring in one of the medium-aged or young plantations. Other things are going on the property, of course: riparian, restoration, log placements, planting, upgrades to culverts, upgrades to fish ladders, those types of things are happening. Slide. And the other suite of management activities: road maintenance, weed control, meadow restoration. We're creating snags for habitat, pre-commercial thinning. So a lot of this stuff really relies on partnerships with our watershed councils and the Citizen National Forest and other funding agencies. So this is an image of the fish ladder at the South Fork intake on the South Fork of Rock Creek. So that was put in place with lots of help from lots of partners.
Some takeaways for you guys. Thank you for your attention. I hope you guys have seen that forest management can take many different forms across different municipalities. Those goals and objectives are going to differ by the municipality and the community, but overall, we feel really strongly at Trout Mountain that a balanced approach can really help achieve multiple objectives up on these landscapes. And with that, thank you. Some contact information for follow-up questions or loud, angry noises or anything in between. Really appreciate the attention, the opportunity to share with you guys.